The moon is high, the mists are settling, and the season for spine-chilling stories is upon us. Yes, Earthlets, it's Halloween. So on this episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast, we'll be dedicated to the horrific, the monstrous, and the terrifying. And I'm not just talking about my beard. Welcome to the 2000 AD Thrillcast Earthlets. I'm your host, as always, Molch-R. And on this episode, we'll be giving you our best recommendations for comic books about things that go bump in the night, specifically the most chilling 2000 AD collections, but also our top tips for thrillers far and wide. And don't forget that you can download the 2000 AD app, where all our recommended titles from Rebellion can be found at a tap of the screen. Just go to 2000ad.com and click on app and download now. Well, on this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by one of my favorite people in the entire world. Who better to embark on this odyssey of the odd and occult than with journalist and critic and the writer of, to be quite frank, some excellent Godzilla comics, Rosie Knight. Welcome to the show, Rosie.
Oh, you two are one of my favorite people in the world. I am very happy to be here to talk about all the fantastical, spooky comics you can read, because there are so many.
Yeah, well, actually, this is the thing. It's people think of 2000 AD as a sci-fi and fantasy comic, but there's a deep vein of horror. You know, horror tinge sci-fi, horror tinge fantasy, but absolutely some absolute crackers. So I want to get your view on what are some of the best and you know, books that you recommend both at 2000 AD and beyond. And I'll chip in with some of mine, and hopefully by the end of this half hour or so, people will have their tablets absolutely packed with with horror reading for Halloween. So let's kick off. What's your first recommendation for a horror title?
Okay, so I think that something that people don't think about when they think of 2000 AD is the vast expanse of horror anthologies that are available. You know, we think about EC Comics, or we think about, you know, Tales from the Crypt or Creepshow or something like that. But actually, when we were prepping for this, I was reading 40 Years of Scream. And there are just so many good stories in that vein by like some really, really incredible creators. Like you're talking about the classics, Alan Moore, John Wagner, Cam Kennedy, Steve Dillon, Jose Ortiz. Like the archival collection you guys have at the moment, I think if you are someone who loves to read, you know, it's like a Twilight Zone-esque tale, or should I say a Night Gallery-esque tale, because it's more in the horror vein. But I love a story that has a little twist at the end. There's something so nostalgic to me about horror anthologies, and I really loved delving into Scream. There's some really scary stories in here, and also as well just some really gorgeous black and white art, which I just love, like really detailed, intricate, obviously a lot of times with like a fun moral bent. Like the person getting the comeuppance will likely have done something wrong. You're unlikely to see like some kids just get in trouble. But I also loved that collection because if you want a little bit of horror comedy, you've got that too. It kind of spans the gamut, and I think that's really, really appealing to me. I mean, they even have, there was a story in here called The Terror of the Cats. And it's kind of like What If the Birds, but it was like the cats. The art is so great, and it really felt like a precursor to, you know, if you're a fan of manga and you love Junji Ito, who I just highly recommend you can go out and pick up any of his horror comics. But he recently did a book that was about his cats, who he loves, but he drew them in this very scary style, in his more, you know, traditional horror style. And that story in here really reminded me of him. I was thinking, like, I bet he would love this one. So yeah, and also great covers. If you're somebody who enjoys like a vintage comic and you're always picking up like an old, you know, House of Mystery, or you love the aesthetic that they use for the new Creepshow comics, this is kind of very much in the space of where those designs come from, and there's some really fun stuff with like, and it has like free spooky spider, and it has the warnings on the front. It's like, not for the nervous. Like, I love that stuff. So that for me was, I knew Scream was in the 2000 AD space, but I hadn't necessarily done like a deep reading. But I think this is like a very, very fun kind of, you can share it. Also lots of memeable moments that I feel like we all like nowadays to share on your Tumblr or your, X as they call it. There's a great one about like video games, like evil video games, just so much fun.
I mean, we did an episode of the podcast a few years ago now, and had I think it was Ian Rimmer on, who's one of the editors, and he said, specifically after all the scares in the British media about the effect of comics, you can't and particularly the Comics Code Authority in America, so they leavened Scream with a bit of camp, with a bit of silliness, and it really works. And I mean, you talk about the kind of figures, those glow in the dark vampire fangs,
exactly,
front of the first issue. It's like, that's kid catnip, right?
They're telling you right there. And also like there's just so much fun in these, like the second edition of Terror of the Cats, which the logo is so fantastic. I'm like, am I gonna get this as a tattoo? I'm not sure, but they like the slogan is like a no longer pampered pets, they have become crazed killers. This is like, it's so much fun to read this stuff, and just that makes so much sense that it was being published post all the kind of Wortham Comics Code, where they couldn't even have Marv Wolfman's name on the front of a Marvel comic because it said Wolfman. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's truly just a feat of really beautiful black and white pen and ink. I would definitely say, like, if you're somebody who has read a lot of the Marvel horror, like Tomb of Dracula, where Blade hails from, this is very evocative of that kind of 70s, as the Comics Code was loosening, the kind of art we were getting over there, but in a really unique way, with a lot of really fun, and I feel like very British, like, ideas. Like,
I mean, obviously, Oni have recently started redoing EC Comics, so there's definitely something in the air about horror anthologies.
And Skybound is doing Creepshow now, so we're definitely in a realm for it. But I bet this is something I read as a PDF with the joys of the internet, but I bet that this is like a very satisfying, chunky, like in your lap kind of read if you get a physical version. And if not, I got to tell you, this art looks so good on your old iPad or your computer screen. So this was high on my list, and I was expecting that my next one would be my first recommendation, because that was something I was already familiar with, but this was like a really great surprise. I think it's like, because of including the covers and stuff, it feels like a really whole experience. Like, it's a little bit archival, it's a little bit educational, and it's a lot bit kind of fun, spooky nostalgia.
Well, because and this collection sold out before it even hit shelves.
That doesn't surprise me.
So that's being reprinted at the moment, so that should be out relatively soon. I'm gonna talk about my first recommendation, because every year my wife and I carve pumpkins, and it's a massive.
I saw them this year; they're amazing.
I know. But what's slightly irritating this year is that I bought my A game. Like, I was a bit weak last year, and she rightly won, because we do like a public poll, so we put it up on our social media, and people vote, and the winner gets bragging rights. So I thought, this year I'm going to pull out all the stops, and I've done what I think is one of the greatest things I've ever done. It's a partially submerged Pennywise the Clown.
Oh, it's unbelievable! The lettering is astonishing.
Yeah, right. And so I was really, like, I finished it quite quickly as well. I was like, yeah, I've won. And then she turns around with this pumpkin, which is Nadia from What We Do in the Shadows TV series, with the moment we always laugh at, where she go fucking Mike. You don't take it as a personal slight, but and it's brilliant. And I've just I can't. I've lost yet, despite doing like the just absolute A game. I've lost, but that's by the by.
You went for serious scares, and she saw the skill that you were bringing, because the lettering in the water where it says "we all float down here," like that's amazing. But she was like, I know how. She's like, I'm going to bring the meme pumpkin.
Yeah.
That also is like slightly an insult towards my competitor. So who's not going to be able to say yes? You two are very good at pumpkin carving.
It's something that we discovered that we both. I mean, she's very crafty and artsy anyway. And so yeah, it's just become like this annual thing, and it's nice that people look forward to it. The reason I bring it up is because we always watch like schlocky horror films that we can have on while we're concentrating on pumpkins. And this year we watched the 2002 masterpiece, the Joel Silver, Robert Zemeckis, I think, masterpiece, Ghost Ship.
Oh, incredible! Iconic.
I mean, and there's a 2000 AD connection, of course. Carl Urban plays one of the salvage crew, along with Gabriel Byrne and various others as well. And it made me laugh all the way through, because it's quite bad. But going to my recommendation is Leviathan by Ian Edgington and Disraeli, which is set on a giant, like a city size 1920s cruise liner. It's mixing Silent Hill with Titanic. And it's just it's relatively short, so you can just get the one and done collection and make it all the way through. It's the film that films like Ghost Ship wish they were.
Yeah, I mean the art is just unbelievable. Like the sketches of the I was gonna say the sketches of the like the city on top of the boat is just so good.
It's one of my. I mean,
it's kind of like the World Fair, but it's on a cruise, and kind of all the horrors that come with that.
Yeah, and Ian and Disraeli are very good at just this kind of creating atmosphere.
Absolutely,
particularly with like period pieces, and Ian has been working on Fiends of the Eastern Front, which was another great horror series, which is kind of branched out from its World War II origins. Leviathan for me is just like peak 2000 AD, like completely out of nowhere. Here's a horror series, period piece, and it's one of the grossest, most sinister that you'll read.
The deaths and the way that the dead people are portrayed. Also, I love like when you're in the bottom of the ship and you're looking up is like incredibly claustrophobic, and it's very much like that class system that would kind of exist in any city or any boat, as we've seen in Titanic. I would also say I think this is a good one. When I was reading all the comics before, this one was really I think if somebody came into a shop for me and they were like, oh, my favorite comic is From Hell, like I would say read Leviathan. It's like very much in that same space, like aesthetically and tonally, though this goes like a lot more for the kind of really cool, weird sci-fi scares. I mean, this also might be one of my favorite Disraeli books, like art-wise. The art is, I love an intricate art piece, and by making the ship the center of the story, there's so much intricacy that you get in like the pipes and the story, and then it kind of becomes so much more and so much stranger. I think that's a great pick.
Yeah. So what's your second recommendation?
Okay, I'm gonna not surprise anyone here if you've ever heard me on this podcast before, but my other one is another anthology, which is the Misty 45 Years of Fear. Great. I love this book. I love Misty. I was like very excited when I saw you guys were bringing Misty back, and I was like sending out vibes. I was like, Gail Simone, you need somebody to help you. Let it be me. I actually got to do a panel with Gail. It was really great at San Diego, and we had a great time talking about kind of horror comics. And where these kind of come to be. I've spoken about this before on the podcast, so I won't go on for too long because we've done panels about this. But I just think where Scream is like this really fun camp, almost like a kids' Halloween party, perfect comic you could get in like a party bag or something. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like Misty is still this great undiscovered gem that every time you point someone in the direction, they find something profound about it. I mean, hilariously, I've never actually told you this story, but this is also is now a very close to my heart book, because after the panel that we did together where we talked about Misty and British horror comics, the guy who runs my local comic shop happened to be at that panel. And the first time I ever went in there, he went, "Oh my God, are you Rosie Knight from the Misty 2000 AD panel?" And that's how we became friends. So that's the power of comics, guys. But I think that as we, venture more and more into these spaces of like inclusion in comics and what does it mean to be represented in comics and stuff, I think that Misty is this really fantastic, almost like proof that women have always been into comics and also been into weird comics, and that little girls love kind of horror and strangeness. And there's so much fun to be had in not just the scary stuff, but in like the interactions between the girls in like Moonchild and stuff. It feels very real. It feels very of a time. And also there's fantastic fashion, fantastic hairstyles. This is a book that is much more concerned with representing what women actually looked like at the time than a lot of other books, because it's not a superhero book. It's set in schools. And yeah, I love this collection. I think it's one of the best things. I think you guys are doing like a really incredible job of being an archival space for this honestly like underseen, almost nowadays feels like underground women comics, though ironically they were, able for kids to just buy, which is an amazing feeling. But yeah, Misty, I can't high enough. If you're one of those, if you're listening to this and you love comics already and you make comics, which I'm sure there are many of you, if you're an artist who loves to draw fashion and to draw portraits, this is a book to read. Like every single comic has a hairstyle in it that you're going to be like, "Oh my God, I need to draw that," or "Oh my God, I need that haircut." Like it's unbelievable how specific they go with it while still telling these like totally spooky, scary, and also as well, I would say pretty like prescient genre stories like Nightmare Academy and stuff. They could recognize that there is an appeal to girls of like, what if my life was exactly how it is, but there was a little bit of horror? Or what if I could do magic? Or what if I was telepathic? Like there's something about it that's so appealing. And yeah, I love this book.
Brilliant. So my next recommendation is a bit of a modern classic, Thistlebone.
Yes.
Now, Thistlebone is, the folk horror revival has now been going on for so long. It's not really a revival. It's just
almost a second age, a second wave. It just is.
Absolutely. So if you're in any way, shape, or form into Ben Wheatley's films, or you like
Ari
the
Aster.
yeah, wonderful. M.R. James. Anything like that, even the kind of through to Hammer horror stuff. I mean, there's a vein of Hammer horror in it as well. Thistlebone by Tom Eglinton and Simon Davis is, for my money, the kind of next step up for horror in comics. In that it's fully painted folk horror, Hammer horror referencing schlockfest that's genuinely unsettling as well. Like, and there's going to be a third book out
I'm
in
so
2012,
happy about that.
and
Yeah.
it's just for me it manages to maintain the unsettling quality thanks to the fact that it's it's fully painted and it's Simon Davis.
Yeah,
and
it's
he's just
very Wicker Man. It
Yeah,
really manages
absolutely.
to channel the Wicker Man. Something I love about this book, I feel like, and this is as a writer as well, a lot of times when you try and write like a spooky book or a folk horror book, which I'm very interested in. I'm trying to do like a cosmic folk horror set in Brighton at the moment that I've been working on. And like a lot of times they're so interested in like, you have to explain it to the audience. You have to
Mm,
start by being like, here's your in character. And they're going in this, the first page is just like pure folk horror brilliance. Like you already see the singing and the Wicker Man-esque costumes. Like you're kind of thrown into it
mm,
in a way that I think makes it feel a lot more like a classic horror story. It doesn't feel like you're reading a comic where they're saying like this is what happens. By the like 10th page you've got some of this like unbelievably stunning, the page where the wolf and the rabbit and the deer are kind of like looming over this young woman is just so cool. Yeah, I think this is a big underrated gem and it should be getting more like credit than it does. But you know the great
yeah.
thing about comics,
Mm,
there's going to be people finding this in volumes in trade paperbacks forever now in comic shops, and it will gain its cult kind of growing fandom as they discover it because it is just so cool. And I think you're right, the folk horror is horror now. You know, that's what
yeah,
people
yeah,
want to read about, it's what they want to experience. Man, this is such a cool book.
it also for me answers that question that coincidentally a lot of people seem to have been asking recently, which is, can comics actually do horror? Like
Mm.
not just that kind of short anthology twist in the tail kind of future shock
Can you
stuff.
have a scary page turn? Like, can you actually
Exactly.
be scared? And
Yeah.
the answer for in this is definitely yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. What's your next book?
Okay, I'm gonna go outside of 2000 AD just because I think,
Ooh.
especially after this, and it's a it's a completely self-published online book, and I
Mhm.
think 2000 AD fans will love it. It's by Olivia Stevens, and it's called Darlin and Her Other Names, and it's gorgeous black and white, stunning Western werewolf story that's also kind of a romance that is just one of the best books I've read in a long time. I've been kind of hyping it up for ages because it really
Mm.
is stunning. And I think, again, that kind of folkloric horror, that intimate horror, that blend that we now have of like horror as, you know, an understanding of the other, and horror and romance, and finding someone who's like you in a world where everyone is trying to, you know, stop you from being the person that you are. This, I just think it's really brilliant. I think in a world of like where everyone's interested in doing Western noir and new versions of Westerns, this to me is one of the best we've gotten. And as a werewolf story, it's also completely unique and different. And yeah, I truly love this. I in the end ended up winning the Ignatz last year for outstanding artist, and I'm very excited. Currently there's one part up, part one Marta, but I'm very excited for more. And if you like it, you can support Olivia has like a Gumroad and all that kind of fun stuff where you can support her. But yeah, this is just a really cool book, and also I think very tonally and vibily in the same realm as Thistlebone, in that it feels like something no one else is doing.
Mm, mm. I mean, it looks absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
To be quite frank, it's yeah, and it is noticeable. I mean, it's something that my colleagues in our fiction department have been very forthright about, which is, you know, there's a huge market for horror, like all
Yeah.
genre. It's so easily dismissed as formulaic or whatever, but really, if you look at what's selling at the moment as you
Mm-hmm.
know, a very base metric, um, people are into their horror stories.
I
You know,
mean,
not just seasonally as well.
yeah, James Tynan, you know, hit the success of his and Alvaro Martinez Bueno's The Nice House by the Lake, and now The Nice House by the Sea, has been so prominent and noticeable at DC that they have reinstated the Vertigo imprint.
Yeah.
and are going to have this horror book as their flagship new title within Vertigo. And obviously James Tynan's been, Something's Killing the Children, hugely popular. He had a horror book at Distillery that was really cool, like a strange kind of, it was like a locked room, haunted house on haunted hill kind of mystery called Spectrograph. So definitely I think the space is there. And it's interesting because it's almost like every publisher knows it, but it's the audiences don't necessarily know how much horror the publishers have. Because like you guys have a really extensive and cool horror catalog that maybe people don't necessarily immediately think of when they think of 2000 AD because of, all the judge of it all and all the stuff that you're kind of globally famous for, So I'm really glad we were able to kind of drill down a little bit on that, because I do think horror comics are in a bit of a new renaissance, and it's amazing as someone who's always loved them since I was a kid.
I mean, it's worth noting that I mean, you bring up Dread there. How much horror there is in Dread.
Oh yeah.
And so, on a straightforward kind of horror story like The Haunting of Sector House 9, which is just really great fun. But then the Judge Anderson stuff.
I was going to say, even just like the notion of like the mutants and like the actual horror of the more existential and kind of like political horrors, which have gone on from Judge Dredd to influence horror directors in, look at the similarities between The Raid and Judge Dredd. Those two things were made at the same time, but those influences are so there. This kind of idea, this notion of like class as this tool to keep people down and the horrors that happen when you have to kind of fight your way out of it. Yeah, I think that it's inherent, not just in the fact that there are horror stories, but in the fact that a lot of what is experienced in Judge Dredd stories is horrific.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you get the kind of pure stuff like Necropolis, where you've got a horror epic. Within the space of 10 years, you go from him being, like a war hero in the Apocalypse War, something that is also full of fantastic horror moments, through to the city being taken over by undead alien super fiends. It's absolutely so. But yeah, my next recommendation, it's for me, it's a bit of an obvious one, but it's Cradle Grave. By John Smith and the much missed Edmund Bagwell. Because you're talking there about class within horror and how vital that is to telling good horror stories that have that element.
Oh, absolutely.
You look like something like Attack the Block. Which is a
legendary
horror thriller. Cradle Grave is a pure class dissection of horror. So it's about a kid coming home. Well, no longer a kid, now a man coming home from prison to the council estate that he grew up on, and it being the same but different. And so you get the wonderful metaphor of having grown up, you see the horrors of you wouldn't notice when you were younger. And the story as it is relatively straightforward. And I'm not going to do any spoilers for this, but it's just in the atmosphere, like a bit like Leviathan. It's in the atmosphere, it's in the page turns, it's in the characters, and that creeping sense that something isn't right. And that's something that 2000 AD seems, for my money, seems to do really, really well.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm actually glad you brought this one up, because this had been. I was reading this recently because I have been trying to work on like a horror story that's set on a council estate, because that's like where I grew up, and I just think that there's so much interesting there's so many interesting things to be mined from that, because you're living in it's almost like living in a commune, because you all live so close to each other, but some of those buildings have been there for 100 years. Some of them are new. What does it mean when there's a new build? I'm interested in like the idea of video nasties and exploring them within the context of like growing up in Britain, in London. You know, I grew up when Texas Chainsaw Massacre was technically still banned till 2001 in England because of video nasty laws, you know. So I was revisiting this and I just thought it was so great. And you know what else? It really gives me that very specific feeling of like a great weird British comic that nobody knows about. Like I think a lot about the Grant Morrison book, like Kill Your Boyfriend. It's like visually and aesthetically, it's this almost like contemporary, but it still feels like it could have been published, and you're finding it as like a trade paperback that's like got yellowed newspaper pages. And yeah, I just think this one is really good. I'm glad you brought it up, because also nobody tells any stories in council estates, especially not in comics. So this was like, I was looking to be like, is this something that has been done before? Like, what do you do to bring it to life? Like, what's their version of it? And this is a different version because it's very concerned with like, you know, ASBO kind of culture and the way that and that chav ideas that were like pushed upon poor people in the UK. So I think this is a really cool book. And also I like any book that is about somebody who's been in prison, because oftentimes that's somebody who's written off in not only society but also in fiction, because why would I tell a story about that? That's like the end of the journey. And I like here that is not the case. So I think this is a great pick. And yeah, definitely if you're an Attack the Block fan, I think this is a great transitional horror comic. And I've been so glad to see Attack the Block getting like a lot of love nowadays. They've actually been screening it at cinemas here in LA. I got to go and see it at Vidiots. There's been kind of a big, I think, consideration, and also just people discovering it who never got to see it before. I saw it at the Alamo a few years ago. Mark Bernardin presented it there, and then I saw it at Vidiots last year, and I got to take one of my friends from London who'd never seen it, which was really funny. So yeah, another great pick.
Wonderful. So what's next for you?
I am currently trying to survive the threat of AI. That's it's definitely been interesting to be a freelance writer on the internet. I've been a full-time freelance writer in digital media for 7 years, and the last couple of months is the first time when it started to feel like, oh, I can see that this is going in a direction that means I might need to kind of broaden my mind. But I do have, in next year I will have a new book coming out that is like a non-fiction book about a fictional world that people enjoy. I will also have a book story in an anthology horror comic, which I'm very excited about. And yeah, and then just like looking to kind of tell more stories and do more comics and keep writing about this cool stuff and doing stuff like this. And obviously, I have a podcast called X-Ray Vision, which is at iHeartRadio or iHeart Podcasts. And it is with my Emmy-winning co-host, Jason Concepcion, who's amazing. And we basically just talk about comics, movies, TV, and film. And there's 3 episodes a week on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So you can always, if you're liking The Penguin, or you're liking Agatha All Along, or you want to hear us talk to James Tynan about Nice House by the Lake, then all of that is covered within that podcast.
Amazing, and it's a great show. I keep up when I can.
No, I know. There's so much stuff. Like even for us, like we're like, guys, we get it. Like there's a lot, and we have we're really lucky. We have like a very active Discord, so we know like what our listeners want us to cover, and even then we still don't get to cover. I mean, me and Joelle, who's our super producer, who was kind of behind us, our reinvention at iHeart, we've been trying to cover Doctor Who since it started, like earlier this year, and we just still haven't had time to actually like cover it. So it really is that we're living in a time of a lot of stuff being made. But you know what? It's kind of a blessing because there's a lot of great stuff being made too.
Wonderful. Right. One last recommendation.
I am going to go for Kabbalistics.
Yes.
Which I just thought was like so utterly fantastic and cool. And for me, this was the first one that I didn't already know about or hadn't already heard about when I was looking through this. But the cover was giving like Mike Mignola, like I was thinking immediately of kind of that like Hellboy. And also I love anything about demons. I think demons are like this really interesting space in my mind in, you know, fiction and culture, because I was raised by an atheist, but I find them very, very interesting. Anything to do with kind of demons and what does it mean to be a part of, you know, a demonic organization, or or to have demons hunting you down. I'm not sure if you watched it, Molch, but one of the best TV shows, in my opinion, of the last like decade, which also we didn't get a chance to cover on X-Ray Vision, hilariously, because there's so much good stuff, was Evil, which I just okay. I was gonna say I can't recommend it enough. Like, I think it completely, for me, reimagined the kind of idea of like religious horror, and it had so many fantastic episodes. So that's really been reinvigorating my mind to kind of look into stuff, because sometimes I think when you think about demons or demonic horror, it can feel quite like there's one road for it, like The Exorcist, or there's one way of doing it well. But there's actually been some really incredible demonic. The First Omen I loved this year. I did a podcast called Too Scared Didn't Watch, where me and Jason watched The First Omen, and then we explain it to one of the co-hosts who hasn't seen it because she doesn't like horror movies. And I was blown away by how good it was. And this was definitely, when I was reading this was definitely in that space. Also, as well, like, I love, in case you couldn't tell by all my picks and the way I keep talking about it, I just love black and white comics. Like, it makes me feel so excited to be able to just see the way that artists use shadow and use line weight, and especially in Kabbalistics, there's these unbelievable sound effects, which is another big thing that I'm really into. If you read my comics, I'm always encouraging the artists to do very silly sound effects. I also think in this particular book, the black and white works really well because it makes some of the more grotesque, occult kind of sacrificial moments, they're not as heavy. They're not that kind of painted deep red colors. So yeah, I thought this was really cool. It kind of has this mixture between like, it's like got that Hellboy aspect of like, there's like cool people with guns who are trying to like discover what's going on, but it also has this kind of Alan Moore-esque like London mystery history of the city and how that connects to, you know, these demonic things going on, which is what I always really took away from Hell, was like all the stuff about like the stonemasons and how they would lay the left piece of stone next to the church when they built it, and all this kind of historical stuff that I had no idea about. And this is another comic as well, like Thistlebone, where you are just in it. Like, don't worry that you're gonna have to like learn about anything or be like handheld through it. It's like you're just gonna get like badass demonic action like straight away. This was a book that took me totally by surprise because I didn't know about it. I'd read most, or at least read like reviews of or heard people talking about. But yeah, I really like this one. I think it's really badass. And I also think if you're like somebody who has enjoyed the work of, say, Frank Miller in Sin City, but maybe you don't enjoy revisiting it for whatever reason, and maybe you're like, I want to enjoy an aesthetic like that, you know, somebody like Danny, who's like an incredible big two. You know, I love Danny so much. She is really bringing that style back, and I feel like in this book we are getting another version of that really dynamic, stylized black and white space that I think is just some of the most exciting stuff that you can get in comics. Like, Dom Reardon does such an unbelievable job. And also I love Love and Rockets is like, by the Hernandez Bros, is like one of my favorite all-time comics. So I still always kind of am drawn to a brilliant black and white comic. Also, I think like I read a lot of Marvel and DC in the old compendiums where they were just cheaply printed in black and white or like phone book size. and so that it was easy to print them for a low cost and you could sell them for cheaper. So I just think there's something to me that feels very enjoyable. But when you read a book that's supposed to be just read in black and white, I think that's a very special experience. And this one was just fantastic for that.
Brilliant. And if anyone's listening who wants to get into Kabbalistics, there's also by the same writer, Absalom, which is taking the idea of that kind of BPRD. You know, there's an organization that's dealing with demons and the occult. That's really good. That's Tien and Trevelyan on art with that, and that's really recommended. I'm conscious of the time. My last recommendation is my one non 2000 AD recommendation, and that's Dwellings by Jade
Oh
Stevens.
yeah, what a pick! I love this book. Was everywhere at San Diego Comic-Con, and it made me so happy to see it because it's such a beautifully put together book.
Yeah, and it's for those who don't know, basically it's kind of like a Stephen King-esque thing where all the stories are set in the same place. In this particular town where all these sinister and unpleasant things happen, but it's done in a I guess what you'd call like a childlike kind of style of art. There's like a kid's comic.
It's kind of evocative of it's like Disney meets Max Fleischer meets like Looney Tunes. Like it's meant to evoke like the feeling that you're reading like a kid's book. Yeah. But it's kind of this terrifying stuff that's going on.
And if I was skeptical about it. I wanted something to read from San Diego, and I happened to be at the Oni booth, and I picked it up, and it's one of the most unsettling things I've ever read. There's something about that style of art, and all the kind of like they've done kind of mock adverts like you used to get in comics, and it's printed in such a way that it kind of evokes the smell and the feel of the pages, even if it's not kind of newsprint. And it's just it accentuated and enhanced the horror of the whole thing. And it's one of, I guess for me, I don't know whether this is praise or not. It's one of the times where I'm like, this would sit well in 2000 AD.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it is praise because you've invested so much of your life and your work, and you've put out brilliant stuff there. That I think if you find something and you're like, this would be something we would be proud to publish, or that would fit in with this kind of esoteric, like eclectic space that we've created, I think that's always a compliment.
Yeah, no, I totally enjoy. Very unexpected enjoyment as well. We're out of time.
Yes, I know. I'm a professional yapper, so I'm always going on. But yes, it was a joy to join you, and always happy to join you again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, this is just I've got like a pile. Like I've got what is it? I've got Barry Windsor Smith's Monsters here that I was going to talk about.
I love him so much.
Sarah Gordon's Vicious Creatures. I got a whole pile of stuff here that we didn't get to, but it's been absolutely fascinating. If you are interested in any of the 2000 AD books that we have discussed, like I said, they are available on the 2000 AD app, and some of them are available as paperbacks from all good comic book stores, bookstores, and online retailers. Rosie, if people want to find you online, where can they?
You can check out my whole portfolio of articles. It's at rosieknight.com or author.com/Rosie Knight. Also, I am at Letterboxd and Instagram. That's my only social media with Rosie Marks, Marx.
Wonderful. And if anyone wants to see my attempt to beat my wife at pumpkin carving, I'm on social media as Molch-R.
Perfect.
And please lament for me. But anyway, this has been fantastic. We must do it again. Thank you so much.
Yes, definitely.
And
thank you.
Until next time, Earthlets, don't be afraid of things that go bump in the night. Enjoy Halloween, and we shall see you in 2 weeks' time. And from me and from Rosie and everyone at 2000 AD, Splundig Verthrig.